Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. As a retired special agent with over 3 decades of service, I'm thrilled to host and facilitate these conversations to provide you with a deeper understanding of the intricacies that exist within police work. TV shows and movies often distort reality and the truth by inaccurately glamorizing and exaggerating various aspects of police work, blurring the lines between truth and fiction. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. So whether you're a seasoned true crime enthusiast or someone new to this world, please join me as I explore riveting stories that will shape your understanding of policing. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Today, we've got a great guest who is a retired 20-plus year veteran of the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. And, I just want to say, prior to getting him here, he said a number of times, like, who am I to speak about a topic? What makes me an expert? And I just found that so interesting because just through his years of experience, his training, the missions, everything he's done, I think that just, qualifies him or just about makes him an expert in certain things. And honestly, in my opinion, this guy's a hero. He's super modest. He's extremely humble. And we're just fortunate to have him sit here and talk with us today. I just wanted to mention that, we had met, maybe a year or two back. And we actually worked together. And we were both teaching, instructing, training law enforcement, teaching officers, teaching students. And then during that time frame, we had, I would call them sometimes spirited, often many philosophical debates and conversations about many things in law enforcement, many things in the military, training, work ethic, motivation and more. And I've always found it interesting to talk with other professionals like you and to learn about them, to learn about their background, learning about their training, what drives them. And again, I just want to say I appreciate you being here.
No problem.
And like I said, we've worked together for many years, and I think if folks just give this episode a listen, you're going to benefit in many ways from listening to this conversation here. Is a 20-year retired veteran of the U.S. Navy SEAL teams 1, 2, and the Naval Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6. He's completed 11 separate combat deployments throughout the world with 4 Bronze Stars, 3 with V for Valor, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and other Joint Service Awards for honorable service. He's a master training specialist responsible for curriculum development and instruction on multiple programs for Tier 1 SOCOM, Office of the Naval Intelligence, the U.S. State Department, and local law enforcement. Has been an instructor also after his Navy career, instructing law enforcement for many, many years in firearms training, tactical operations, and state post curriculum development. So that's a super impressive background there. Appreciate it. Again, appreciate you being here. Let's go ahead and start talking about, I'm going to refer to my notes here today because I think this is such an important conversation. I just want to make sure I stay on track here. And what we're going to talk about today is it's a really interesting topic. It's the mindset required to successfully survive a high stress critical incident. Where does that mentality come from? How does a person get it? I think in law enforcement, a high stress or critical incident can be a shooting, whether you shoot someone or whether you're shot. You, exactly. Your partner or coworker gets shot or dies. School shooter situations with, yeah, absolutely, with horrific injuries to children, a horrific vehicle accident, any type of traumatic event. And here, this is where I'm kind of going to defer to you. In the military, I can only guess. I don't have military experience. An event like you or a team member being seriously injured or maimed, a team member being killed. There's great possibility of being captured and tortured. These are all high stress critical incidents. Could you share with us any additional examples of an incident where it would help to have the right mindset in your military experiences?
So let's first talk about the idea of where does it come from. All right. So when you come into a military program, the more specialized you get or more exclusive the job is to being individuals. For example, if you're part of a mobility team, well, then you're just in vehicles. You're not part of a larger force. If you're on a small boat, well, then you're only comprised of that group of people. If you're a sniper pair or reconnaissance, well, then now you're down to a couple of people or just yourself sometimes. If you do covert operations and you're going in by yourself, that's it. So a lot of this, we have to have reliability programs to say, how did we get you prepared before you did these things? And we call it stress inoculation. So some of it's due to your selection process on how you were picked for the specific job or how you were a candidate, and they screened you from multiple candidates. So part of that process of going through that is stressful. They'll simulate combat conditions. They'll take advantages away. They'll give you the route there, and then they'll change the route. If you're using some kind of navigation system, well, now you have to go back to manual methods of using a compass or using the stars or your pace count. So the whole idea is to say, when you count on things, if they can take those key pieces away from you like crutches, it forces you to be enabled on your own or have to have self-reliance, self-confidence. So that starts from day one when you enter the military. The idea of boot camp, that's a stress inoculator, being yelled at. One thing that's different compared to other civilian jobs is that in the military, you are expected to be a leader. As you make rank, very similar in the police force, you're going to be in charge of someone else at some other point. So leadership is kind of thrust upon you. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a great leader or you're going to be effective, but the military is going to give you tools to do that. And that starts in boot camp at the smallest level. And then, like I said, the more specialized it gets, it entails more in-depth stress inoculation. And then the closer you're going to get to combat, or the likelihood of going to combat, you're going to get more of these types of inoculators and scenarios and situations. One thing that's difficult to articulate to people that haven't been in the military is the idea of what we call cost benefit. If you're in a conventional force, there's a good highly chance that you'll go to combat, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're the best trained. Doesn't necessarily mean they give you the best stress inoculation. It's all down to dollars and cents. How many bullets can we buy? How many training dollars can I spend? Now, the more specialized you get, then you have access to higher funding, higher ability to do things. Your what we call op tempo, how much you actually operate versus take a break or go to schools, is much higher. So for conventional forces that are at the lower tiers, they don't have the budget. They don't have the time, so they're not going to get all of these trainings. Now, it's not to say that they shouldn't get it. It's a matter of cost. How can you finance your army, your group, your warfighters, and be effective? So there has to be conditions. But again, the higher you get into specialization, as an example, I would say, what about a NASA astronaut? How much money do they dump into those people to be super reliant, super capable, to be able to work by themselves if they had to, but hey, this is a bazillion-dollar machine they're going to fly. We
Sure.
can't have mistakes. So they invest a lot of training and money. And of course, their opportunities are much more than a regular person who says, oh, I'm a pilot. I fly small dust crops or whatever. That's a lot more training involved. But on our side, in the SEAL teams, there's a lot that we do to prepare people on the front side to make you extremely independent, be able to lead by example for yourself or for a group, and then to take charge to get the mission done. And most of it's because of our training as far as them taking away every advantage that you had, and you have to do it the hard way. And if you can do it the hard way, well, then that makes it kind of easy when all those other things are given back to you where you have access to it.
Okay, so let me ask this then. You having said all that, is there a specific type of training that the military or even the organization you're with provides you to give you that mindset of survival?
So we do go through a thing called SEER training, which is survival, escape, evasion, and resistance. And that's simulated capture. And depending on the circumstances, there's different types of capture. You can have peacetime governmental detention, meaning you're not at war with that country, but you're being detained. So you can't say, oh, I want to see my state representative. Where's my ambassador? They go, we don't have one of those. And they go, well, you've committed a crime or you're being held and detained for whatever reason. Well, that's not the POW status. You can't say, I want this, I want that. And so they teach you how to deal with these types of things, how to deal with captivity. It might be there for a long time, depending on the relations that the U.S. government has with that nation. What if we're in conflict at some other place with a neighboring country? This might take months, sometimes years. So they try and help you build your resolve for this detention that you're about to undergo, possibly being tortured, possibly being questioned and interrogated. When we say questioned, this is a question and answer situation, but obviously we're not undue stress or
Right.
pain infliction, things of this nature. So that's peacetime. And then there's obviously wartime type of detention where you've declared war on a country and now there might be a prisoner exchange or the idea that you're extended for courtesies because you are a prisoner of war. The things that you're supposed to admit, the things you're supposed to acknowledge, and other things they're supposed to treat you fairly with because of these agreements that we have in those. But again, two types of things, but SEER School addresses those. Most military members go through SEER School, especially if you're going to deploy to a combat zone, and they have different levels of this. And so if you're at higher levels in the SEAL teams, Delta Force, MARSOC, some of those other places, even to include some other governmental agencies, they go through some more serious ones where they ramp up how detailed it is, how real it is, to include bringing in people who speak foreign languages, to simulate the country you might be going to. And the whole point is to prepare you, to say, hey, you've already gone through a stressful scenario as this, and let's see how you did. And then you're evaluated by not only a psychiatrist, you're evaluated by people who talk you through these things to say, here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong. That's huge. That's a big confidence builder in doing that. But again, it comes back to some of your just general training to say, do you think you're capable of doing this? And it's not a matter of, I think I can. I know I can because I've had so many tests up to this point that are so similar that this would be a walk in the park. If I ask you to do 10 pull-ups, we're going to set the minimum at 12. So on your worst day, when you're feeling the crappiest, you could knock out 10 without question. You're going to be over-prepared. So that's a huge mental confidence builder for anything you do. And if you've done this on numerous tasks, trying to learn a new weapon system, trying to master a new type of parachute, a new piece of equipment, an obstacle course, if you have never done it before, but you've done things similar, and then you go do this, that's a huge confidence boost in the idea of what your capabilities are and knowing yourself. That's different. It's not just being cocky and overconfident. Well, I can do anything. It's a matter of, I've had so many similar experiences or things that are very close to this that it's easy. I can pick this up, the small parts that I don't know.
It seems like that intuition is something that you either have or you do not have. It's like you have the right mindset. And this training, does it expand upon that, enhance that? Like, aren't there folks that they just simply don't have the wherewithal to endure certain things, but they're people that do have that, and they know that.
So this isn't
And the
like some
training can enhance
gene
it.
or a trait you can identify in someone, and this is why we have selection processes to go through these. As you go through different selection processes and more specialized the training you get, that's where you identify those people. And the ones who obviously don't have this, when they're going to get weeded out or they'll see their shortfalls. But again, it's not something, a genetic trait you can point to. There's no screening questionnaire you could have at the beginning to go, oh, he has this, and he'll be a perfect candidate and he's going to make it. So you have to have it initially within you, as far as it's something inside you that's there. But again, it's not, well, I know I'm going to make it. I know I'm super confident. It has to be determined as you apply yourself to the task. But the military just doesn't have this magic potion or pill or go, if you just attend this course, you're going to come out at the other end of this thing and have this capability. They will give you the tools. They'll put you through the tests. But now it's how you mentally cope, how you utilize the tools they've given you, and ultimately how much you put and persevere in this to make yourself successful at that selection and get to the other end. But it's not a light switch, it's not a pill, it's not a potion, it's not something you can identify with somebody. It's internal to them. They had it already. The tools in the selection course helped them manifest that and let them understand that it was within them and that they could do it.
That makes complete sense. And I think most people, there's almost a misconception or a misnomer that just the general public might have that, hey, the military has this top secret special training that they can instill that, or like you referenced, a magic pill to give you. That's not the case. It's something that the individual has, and through the various involved training, it's developed like that. And I think that's just a misnomer that the people that, even myself.
To expand upon that, think of it this way. I dealt with a lot of conventional forces, and they were very envious of anybody who was special forces. They go, if I had your budget, if I had your equipment, we could do that. They saw themselves as peers, as similar, and I said, well, the difference is you didn't go through a selection course, you didn't attain these things. And I can equate it to, if I give sniper rifles to people who are not snipers, that does not make them a sniper. That's a super accurate rifle. Are they capable of maxing that rifle out? If they're not, they're just an accurate shot, and now they have an accurate rifle. That's it. But they're not a sniper. And so that enviness of the idea, well, they're special, or they have more money, or they had more opportunities, I could be that. Well, then you need to go through that training. But those opportunities are afforded for those people who have proven themselves, or because they have a mission set for that reason. Not every policeman can have a whole SWAT load out of gear
Right.
to say, well, you're just a regular road cop and you're writing tickets and you're doing security and you're doing this. Well, then you don't need SWAT training. But again, would they like to have it? Could they be prepared? That's awesome. But then it comes down to dollars. Who can afford this much training and too much of the time?
Right, exactly. All right. So I think, we've had, you and I have had conversations about, the younger generation or younger folks, and how perhaps through maybe no fault of their own, or just in general, just because times have changed since you and I were younger and since we were kids and growing up, that perhaps individuals haven't been exposed to or haven't been raised to be confident in themselves, that haven't been given that survival instinct, that hasn't they haven't been assisted in identifying that within themselves. Can you expand on that a little bit about today's folks?
So I'll give you an excerpt from some things I know about SEAL training. Some of the best SEALs that we had come through training came from rural areas, farms, middle America. You would think, well, they need to be street smart, they need to be this. Most of those people had an independent background. They had to do chores on their own. They had to get up on their own. There wasn't a whole lot of automation to their life, or the idea of someone looking out for them. It's like you're on your own, you have a job to do, and you have a responsibility. That was huge at a young level for young men coming in the military. Today, think about most kids. Everything's automated. They have their phone to tell them when to do this. They can find answers on their phone for all this. Sometimes they don't have the ability to judge what those answers are, whether it's truth or not, or it's misinformation. So when do they get put to a task of responsibility? At what age? And when you ask them about this responsibility, is it something frivolous, like you need to clean your room? Or is it something responsible to say, hey, this is to keep you safe, this is to make sure you're healthy, or this is to set you up in the future to do things such as, for example, finances. Teaching a young person about finances now. The idea, well, you can't just keep swiping your credit card. Somebody's got to pay that bill. Well, what if I don't pay? Well, they come repossess your materials.
Right. There's repercussions.
Right. Well, that's not something you can see immediate as far as the damage. Nobody wants to learn about bankruptcy until, man, I can't get a house loan. I can't get a car loan. That's when it's devastating to say, well, yeah, I made some errors in this. Today, most kids are not being given any kind of a challenge or a task. If anything, it's the opposite. Parents are doing way too much for their children. The school is doing way too much for the child. Everyone is thinking we're trying to help them, but in reality, because we're not letting them do things on their own, or they're not getting tasks at the youngest opportunity that they should, based on their capability, to take responsibility, we keep shoving this responsibility further down the road to where they're almost in their mid-20s before they have their first real responsibility thrust upon them. Right? How many kids are living at home past 20?
Countless.
Almost into their 30s sometimes. How many kids are married with children living with their parents? So who bears the responsibility? Is it them or is it their parents because they're providing the housing, the car, possible Medicare with their insurance?
Right.
The more you shrug off all these things, the less these people are apt to be self-confident or to be self-initiators. And it also has the effect of people being reckless because they don't get a chance to see these small losses at the beginning to say, well, now when I can be reckless because I'm young, I go, sure, but is this going to have lifelong consequences? Later on when you go, I was a fool at a young age, it's one thing to say, hey, I was careless as a youth, but I learned from this, and I'm not going to let my kids do these same things. That's different.
Right.
I don't see a lot of that today, though. At the college level and at the academy, as far as the new law enforcement students coming in, I don't see a lot of level of responsibility to where you could say these young men and women are ready to be unleashed on the world and fend for themselves and be confident. Not cocky, but confident because they know what they're capable of. It seems like we try to churn that out at the academy and bring new kids into this, but again, we have a very limited amount of time. And whose responsibility is that? Was it their parents? Because they trained them before they got there. But are we to become their parents while they're at this training? And then ultimately when they leave, is it going to be their FTO? That's their mom or dad now?
Right, yeah. Is the buck passed along?
So, again, when you're asking for people to be go-getters out there and affirmative and be able to take action, it's not something you can just give them this, or they attended this course with this certificate, and now they're going to be confident go-getters. I think that's lacking in today's society.
I think so. I would agree wholeheartedly. And, what you're saying is, that makes it more difficult to find good qualified candidates for the military, good qualified candidates for law enforcement. And I'm not saying everybody is a poor candidate. I'm saying this, my opinion of the perceived shift in society and in the things that you just mentioned, it creates an individual like that. And
well, let me ask you this question from a law enforcement perspective. Do you think training today is better than what it was when you came in?
I think there's certain aspects of it, technology-wise and that type of thing, but I think training is training. Law enforcement.
I would say, from my perspective, a lot of things have improved in the law enforcement realm as far as things that are offered and discussed. Military, definitely. Better gear, better training. But as a cost benefit, you constantly see quality go down versus quantity. Everybody wants more of one thing. We need to push more students through. We can't have just one winner. Everybody needs to be a winner. That kind of mentality suffers when the quality goes down, and then it's up to the individual to say, well, what quality is there? I can always rely on someone else. I don't have to be that leader. I don't have to be that responsible person. That's the opposite of quality control, is to say every student who graduated or came through the course, they all had a quality about them where they could be a leader. They could take these things and go forward. That doesn't seem to be the push today. It seems to be, I just want more numbers, And therefore, if I had a few leaders or capable people amongst a handful of others, well, those are what we call force multipliers, and that'll work out. Instead of, what happens when that road patrol officer is by themselves, or they're paired up with a rookie person and they have to take charge now? That's a little different. When do we step up into the big boy shoes and say, "Oh, all of a sudden I have to be responsible"? And
Right. Right. At what point? Exactly. Let me kind of shift here a little bit and ask you if you would be comfortable in no offense if you're not, but if you would be comfortable discussing your personal experience, like at what point in your life did you realize, hey, I've got this inner drive, I've got this survival instinct. I know I'm not a huge fan of that term, but when did you know that you had it and that it could be developed? Is that a fair question?
so, for those in my community that do know me, I wouldn't say I'm humble. They know I'm opinionated. But I didn't know these things about myself until I went through selection. I knew I wanted to try, but I definitely had a different picture of myself than what I wanted to be. I knew what I was. I knew what my capabilities were prior to coming in the military, and they were limited. And I knew I wanted to give Special Forces a try. So I constantly reflected on myself, well, that's not good enough. I'm middle of the road. Well, when you start doing specific tasks and selection and you're coming in the top 10 or the top 5 out of a group of 100 plus guys all competing, some that you're looking at that are way better physically fit than you, or stronger, or had prior experience with whatever you're doing, and you're brand new to this, and you're beating them, that's confidence. That maybe needs you to look at yourself differently in the mirror to say, well, maybe I am capable. Maybe I underassumed myself. It wasn't to say that I was super humble and the idea of this. I just, at the time, I thought I had an image of what Special Forces was, and I didn't see myself as that. I didn't think I was that physically fit compared to other people. I didn't think I was that fast. I didn't think I was as competitive. I just didn't know. I applied myself, and as things started to go through the course, I started finding out that I got into smaller and smaller groups. I started surpassing other people, and then that was a huge confidence boost to say, well, maybe I should try out for this. Don't try out that. You'll never get in that program. It's super hard. I go, well, you can't go if you don't try.
Sure.
And that was from day one when I came in the military. I won't know unless I go try. And I said, if I flunk out, so be it. But that kind of led me into every selection phase that I ever went into for every program I did, was to say, I don't want to say surprised myself, but was pleasantly relieved to say, wow, I did much better than I expected. And if that continues, every time you apply for a new course or a new selection program, you're already coming in there with a little more confidence.
Building as you go.
Yes. And that's the same thing for most SEALs. I wouldn't say they have the same humility or this and that. They were a football star before they came in. They've always been a leader. Maybe they've been super successful at everything they tried. It's just different for each person. But for myself, I didn't know how good I was going to do, and I came in with huge reservations, like I'm probably going to flunk out, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And then I was, like I said, pleasantly surprised every time it came down to a selection to say, why am I in the top percentiles of this? Maybe I should pursue this. And I did, and that comes down to everything you do. You want to try and be the best that you can.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that translates to, we're talking specifically about you and your situation with Special Forces. I think that applies to, like you said, everything in life. And it applies to law enforcement as well. There's, as we've had conversations in the past, there's great similarities in the military and law enforcement. And there's vast differences as well. But, I would say in law enforcement as well, you kind of go through that same type of building process as you're training, as you're promoting, as you're trying different programs. So I would agree with that. Let me ask you this. And again, if you're not comfortable answering it, feel free to say so. Is there, expanding on the training where you're going through these steps and these phases and you're seeing, hey, I can do this. I am pretty good at this. You get through your training, and then ultimately at some point you're out on mission. Can you discuss a specific mission or incident or something along those lines where you had to draw upon that inner drive to get through it, or someone else in your situation or in the incident had to call upon that drive to survive and get through, if that makes sense?
So let me preface it with a couple things. So in special forces, doesn't matter what branch you're in, there's always this reward for the idea of success. So a lot of people are trying to attain the highest level or achieve. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the best decision makers under the crunch. They're the best machine gunner, the best parachutist, the best diver, the best car driver, best what. But again, when it comes down to the application in a combat scenario, do they get flustered? They're the fastest when we're in training, where this guy is phenomenal. He's in the best physical shape, but he can't climb mountains, or he's just going to get worn. So that doesn't always reveal the perfect candidate for the idea of what we call a structure and a backbone within them, to say they're versatile under everything and they got a calm, cool, collected head. Everybody gets flustered. The difference is, can you exude that confidence and do it and make it look like it's nothing? It's not to say you're never scared. It's not to say you're not confident sometimes, but again, you need to project this to other people. So in training, we try and pick those individuals to be key leaders. That's how they're promoted within special forces, within who gets to be the element leader, who's going to make critical decisions at the command on how people are trained. Not, well, we want to maximize this and we just want this for potential of, well, they're all going to be the best at this. And I go, I don't want race cars. I want dragsters that can run all day, every day, not just win one race and then blow up or falter. So in selecting those types of people, that tempers some of your training to where it's not continually focused in one area. It's very much across the board at what you do on a leadership or the idea of individuality and self-reliance. And you're trying to foster this at every chance you get. But some individuals are less leaders than they are followers. But again, you're trying to promote this. And as much as we do in training, it eventually comes out and you get forced into a leadership position. Like I stated at the very beginning, the military expects you to be a leader from day one. You're going to be in charge of someone else. And so it's a matter of how much that responsibility is thrust upon you. And we do this a lot in special forces where we put you in these situations. So that kind of prefaces where we're at on the idea of how certain leaders are picked and who runs teams and how we do selection and training. Now, when we get into combat, you get to see it firsthand. You might have had assumptions about an individual who did very well, and now they did poorly in combat. And when I say poorly, we're talking about rational judgment. We're not talking about the idea, how did they shoot, how did they move, how did they communicate, but how effective were they in not only doing their job, but possibly leading others, or did they really look like they kind of collapsed in on themselves and they lost focus of everything else other than themselves? And you had to snap them out of it or remind them, hey, and this can happen to anybody in combat, you can get distracted. But again, those people who can stay focused and honed in and lead and make rational decisions, well, it's like clockwork, and you can't believe how good it goes. It's like watching the best football play on TV, and you're like, I can't believe they pulled that off. There's so many things that could have gone wrong if this person wasn't in the right place, if he didn't pass at the right time, if they didn't read the play. When you see it in real life, in combat, it's all, I don't want to say as if time slows down, but there's things you will notice under stress when the adrenaline is pumping as if it took forever to happen. And it was in a matter of seconds, but it seemed like minutes. At the time, it seemed like it was a blur. But you're remembering it after the fact, and then you're realizing, well, who was effective, who wasn't, who did these things. But again, having an assumption of someone before they ever go into combat, you don't know. And it's been the opposite with some folks. Those people you thought were weak leaders, or that were probably not going to stand up to what you thought the test was because they're kind of reserved, they actually stepped up and stepped forward because no one did.
Sure.
And they just came, you asked, and they just stepped forward. In training, we kind of do it, but again, if you're apprehensive in the idea there's 12 other people in this room that are better than me, why should I step to the front and take the lead? again, if nobody takes the lead, you should. And this is when it happens sometimes in combat. So I got to see some guys who were very good at a lot of things not do so well in combat. And I saw some other guys that I thought were super reserved and didn't do so, but like, wow, it's like it didn't faze them at all. And they stepped forward and they made it happen. And so some of those things temper those people. And the idea of they realize now what their potential is and what it was because they got tested. But it doesn't necessarily always make a special operator or special forces person. That doesn't mark them for the rest of their days. It's a learning point. But again, it can have a huge effect on their life, on the idea of what their trajectory is and what they're doing within the element of the team and how much they're going to have influence on other people.
And that kind of reminds me, we were talking a little bit beforehand, before we actually started this conversation. We were talking about, and you had kind of discussed a scenario where there was an attack that you guys responded to, and there was an individual that survived that attack. And you had mentioned snapping out of it and then responding. That kind of, does that scenario we discussed beforehand apply here? Could you expand on that a little bit?
We were at a fire base and we were being rocketed day in and day out. And this is in Afghanistan. It was a bad area, just near where Operation Red Wings was. And I was watching the fireworks from top of our building, and there was a neighboring village, probably 12 kilometers from us, that was getting hammered really bad. And we could see the explosions and the bombs and all this coming off the skyline. And I got on the radio, asked some questions, heard there was no close air support being engaged, no medevac was being called. And I started talking on some different satellite platforms to different commands that owned the areas. And no one was rogering up as to some kind of mission going on. I said, well, this is obviously a pretty big battle that's happening up over there. And we were being rocketed. I was like, well, are these two fire bases being attacked at the same time? This was another fire base that was owned by an ODA unit. And anyhow, next morning came about, and I got a phone call that said, hey, I need to get on the phone to talk to higher headquarters. And they called out and said, hey, there's a neighboring unit for the Army that wants you to go check out this fire base that's near yours. They've tried calling them and they're not getting any answer. And we said, yeah, they're only 12 kilometers away. We could drive up there and go check it out. So we mounted up some vehicles, got a whole armed reconnaissance party together, drove up there, and the entire camp had been wiped out. Everyone was killed. So the remarkable thing that there was no Afghans that we found on target, as far as none of the guard force, none of the Afghan nationals that were hired, just no Afghans were dead. And so this was very strange. And so now we did what we call sensitive site exploitation. We started removing some items, looking for anything of value, weapons, crypto comms, anything of identifiable nature, and the bodies. And the bodies were mutilated, a lot of them. So this was obviously a deliberate attack and had gone full scale across this village to eradicate it. So we're up there, and one of the buildings that had been burned down looked like their TOC, their Tactical Operations Center, or their tent that they were operating out of. That building had been burned to the ground, and we found an individual under the building and pulled him out and brought him back. And this person had a job that dealt with radios.
And this person, he survived. He was alive.
He was the only survivor we found in the whole place. And the only reason we discovered him is because we heard his voice. He was underneath the building. We had to dig him out. So he took refuge under the building during the attack. So to preface this person's specific capabilities, he'd been listening on his radio and heard that his local guard force, the Afghans that had radios, were about to turn on their own fire base, meaning they were going to turn their weapons against the base and they were going to surrender and let the enemy come into their positions and then overwhelm the base itself. And he spoke different languages, Pashto and Urdu and a few others, and he understood this. And so he did not have enough time to alert anybody in the base as to what he heard before the attack took place. So now we come rescue him. It's been about 48 hours now that this gentleman's been awake. He's kind of out of it, and he's pretty shook up, and he realizes everybody's been killed because he watched it or heard it while he was trapped under this building. So now we bring him back to our base, 12 kilometers away, and we're still getting rocketed every night and under attack every so often. And this is really messing him up. He just wants to get out of there. But at that time, because we were receiving so many attacks, we couldn't get helicopters to come and extract anybody to come out. And we were quite a ways away to drive. And during some of the attacks that we had on the base, you could tell it was definitely affecting him, that he was having some PTSD issues. He just wanted to get out of there. And we were like, sorry, we can't get a helo to come in, and it's too far to drive right now. And it was visibly upsetting him. So he kind of reserved himself to, hey, I'm going to be stuck here, and I got to deal with it. So he set up his communications equipment that he still had with him, and he started listening in on some frequencies that we had in our area. And he heard the exact same thing he heard at his fire base. He said, I'm hearing these things for your guard force talking, and they're talking about the idea of they're going to surrender their positions, and they're going to do it at this hour and this time and place. And so when I heard this, I was a little shocked, and I brought this to the attention of some other seniors, along with the guard force that was helping us out, and the situation got resolved right then and there in front of our eyes. But the point was, for him, this is happening to me again. And that sent him over the edge. He was like, oh God, I'm going to witness this again, that we're going to lose. And he was already in shock because we'd been getting shelled overnight from the time that we picked him up. And so we called in close air support, got the issue dealt with the next day as far as the attacks that were happening near us. We routed out some of the individuals who had been making probes on the camp. A lot of the gear was stolen from some of the OPs. As they had advanced through the night, we lost a lot of claymores and a lot of concertina wire and early listening devices. So after the close air strikes and we secured the immediate area around us, we were now able to get a helo in there and get this individual back out of there. But at that point, he had snapped. He had lost it. And I can't put myself in that person's shoes and say I couldn't have witnessed what he witnessed and saw. And then again, for him to have this sense of hopelessness and fear, like, I can't get away. I just lived through this terrible incident, and now here I am less than 24 hours, and I'm about to relive the exact same thing that just happened. And he had no way of getting out of there. And it was kind of disturbing to see, but you could definitely tell, looking and talking to him, that he was somewhere else. He was like, can't you guys understand? And all of us were like, yeah, well, we've been getting rocketed for weeks. We've been in numerous conflicts. We've had the main gate blown up. We've had this. It's not that bad, but we never had our fire base overrun up until that point. And then it came shortly thereafter. It happened within a week of that. But at that point, again, you're talking to someone who's had previous training. He was with a very specialized unit. I know some of the background on the training he goes through is similar to ours. So I was like, well, surely he's going to bounce back out of this thing. But again, that was a lot of stress that he had to endure at that particular moment, and it wasn't getting better.
And that's fascinating to hear that. And if I'm understanding it right, like, not only was he going through that and he had PTSD and he was dealing with that attack where he was the only survivor, and then his fears that it's happening again, but while he's going through that, he has the wherewithal or resolve to set that equipment up, and he discovers that that's going to happen.
I think that was his way of coping because we didn't have anything for him to do, right? And I said, you're stuck here. I said, we're not going to work you into the guard rotation, so I'm not expecting you to man the wall, which we were having to do because we were shorthanded. We were getting attacked every night, so there was always this alert status. You'd hear the rockets come in. We'd have to run to a post, arm ourselves. I'm like, hey, you stay here. We'll come back for you in a half hour. Don't come outside. So all of these things for him was like a bad reminder. So for him, I think him setting his gear up was a way for him to cope. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, once he received that information, he was definitely overwhelmed with the idea of anxiety of like, we have to do something now. And I'm glad he did because it could have been devastating.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. Had he not done that, the same thing potentially could have happened
for sure.
To you. Your camp.
Yeah. We could have been the next domino to fall in that valley.
Wow.
And that's in the same area as Red Wings. That whole area was bad. It was not good.
Yeah. It sounds like it. You know, just I think, and I don't want to belabor this and, drone on about the same thing, but I think the overall summary here is that I like the phrase you used earlier when we started, is there's no magic pill that's given to anyone in military or law enforcement that gives you that inner desire, inner drive, but that it's something that you, at some point in your life, you determine you have it, and then it's expanded on and developed there. In listening to you talk, I find it interesting. I'm kind of reflecting back on my own life a little bit, and I'm thinking back to my father as I was a kid. And, he was like a blue collar, hardworking guy. He was raised on a farm. He didn't have his father died at an early age. He was raised by his grandfather, grandparents, and his mother was there as well. But he was ingrained with that work ethic on a farm, where he learned responsibility. And, later on as he grew, he was a college athlete and then a business owner. And he, at whatever point, determined he had that drive as well. And I think he kind of tried to implement and pass that on to me. And again, I don't have military background or military experience and training, so didn't go through the things you did. But me personally, listening to the things you've talked about, as I reflect back, I think about what my father did and helped me, and I think that helped me in my law enforcement career through the training that I went through and benefited from as well there. So I just wanted to
So
throw
let's
that out
kind of
there.
dive into that for just a second. Think about this. If you ask a young person today, are they able to determine their future if you ask them that question? Most of them will tell you, no, it's not determined by me. It's all these extraneous forces, or it's because I don't have enough money, or I can't get into Yale, or they'll point to everything else that says that's the limiting factor on my success. Whereas some time ago in the past, if you didn't have those resources, you determined your outcome. Now you can say, woe is me, it'll never get as good as this, and this is my life forever, and I will just do this one thing. Or it's to say, I'll make the best of the situation for what I have, and I'll be successful in this small gambit. Now, if I ever had an extra resource, if I ever had a windfall at something, or I became slightly successful, well, I'm not going to sit on my laurels. I'm going to do more with what I got. That's individual drive and the idea of being self-reliant. And they learn that early because they determine their success. When people hand you things, when people tell you that society is the thing that determines what you are, when people tell you that it has to be an education that determines your outcome, that has no bearing on you. You make your decisions whether you win or lose or how hard you try. But you can't say the rest of the world or some other extraneous force is the only thing that will ever pin you down. The only people who can say that are in prison. Your options are taken away.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
But your success here in America is undetermined. You can say, I'm poor. Okay, can you save 2 pennies? That's your 1 penny richer today. If you had a chance to expand yourself on a workforce to do, I did 2 different jobs, 3 different jobs, 7 different jobs. Whatever it was, you tried to enrich your life some point instead of just, woe is me, this is all it'll ever be, and I'll never get any further in my life. If that makes you happy, that was your level of determination. But you can't, like I said, today, if you ask young people what sets them apart from anyone else, or the idea of what determines their future, most of them will point to everything that's extraneous to them on the idea of how they were raised, where they came from, what the government's going to do for them, what college gave them, what opportunities are out there. And almost all of them, I wouldn't say all of them, a large majority of the young people I talk to want what we call the quick win. They want minimal effort and maximum output. I want to win the lottery. I want to be an influencer. I want to be this. And it's all, well, that's minimal input, and yet you get a maximum reward. They go, well, the world doesn't revolve like that. Some people are lucky, but what if that material wealth goes away? What do you have to build on? Oh, I lost all my money. I mean, if you look at millionaires who win the lottery, how many of those people actually maintain their millions and prosper? Or do they blow it all and it's
Squander it. Right.
And special forces, that's something that is really harped upon, the idea that you have to have an individual drive and a reason to want to be here. And if your heart's not in it at that level, that'll kind of determine your path in the special forces as to how long you stay, the leadership roles you're given, or how far you might excel. It's all based upon that. You got to want it. And one thing I'll say about special forces compared to any other unit, work hard, play hard. They reward you. And now, for the hard work you put in, you realized why it was so hard, and now you get to reap those benefits. And civilian society, Everything's kind of delayed or deferred. And if you don't get it immediately, because everything has to be immediate gratification today with today's youth, well, then it seems very disheartening or dissuading. Why work hard? There's got to be an easier way to do this. I can make a windfall. I could just do this. And I don't see them building their self-character. I don't see them working on their self-reliance. I don't see them taking on opportunities that will help build them or make them more self-reliant. I see them trying to take an easier path or share responsibilities versus, no, take it as the sole burden of yourself. You will determine your fate. No one else. Not my parents.
Take the bull by the horns, essentially. So yeah, I think we're on the same wavelength here. You must be reading my mind, because I was essentially going to wind it down with this. Find it within yourself, develop it, and use it when it's needed. That drive, that desire, and you'll be successful in whatever you do for the most part. And if you're in military, if you're in law enforcement, and you get into a traumatic or critical incident, you could potentially survive it as well with that proper mindset. So,
Well, it's not always about winning, right? You got to learn from your failures. And if you're not scared to fail, then you'll do okay. The question is, you just can't be reckless. It's like, well, I failed at everything. I lost millions, and I'm not a successful entrepreneur. But you have to be willing to fail. With no risk, there's no reward. And again, it's personal risk, personal gain. You're better off for it. But again, you don't have to fail constantly to be a winner or to say I'm super wise. But if you never experience what we call wisdom because you didn't make mistakes, if everything came easy or things were handed to you, your personal character is not developing an idea when you're put under adverse conditions. Or if things are taken away, you fall on hard times, you get a disease that can't be cured so easily, and it's devastating monetarily and physically. How are you ever going to recover if you just quit? I can tell you the story of a pilot we went to rescue in our helicopter crash, and I witnessed a pilot just give up. He died. When I say gave up, as far as his wounds during the initial crash, he did not have anything that was life-threatening. He witnessed another crew member perish in front of him who was much more badly burned, and he wasn't going to make it. He was expecting. But he witnessed this, and his concern was for this other co-pilot. And as soon as he heard that he had passed, when we put a tarp over him to cover his body, and we were waiting for the extraction to put the bodies on the helo, he witnessed his friend co-pilot pass, and he just gave up. Died right there on the spot. And we tried to resuscitate him, tried to get him back, and we got him back to base. They ended up doing some small autopsies on the bodies to determine what killed them, the crash, or if they were burned after the fact, and all of this. And I talked to one of the corpsmen that was there on the idea of what happened. And I said, this was very strange. He was fine, talking, blah, blah, blah. All his symptoms were, his stats, heart rate, all this was fine. And the corpsman could only tell me that he just lost the will to live, that he just gave up. I had never seen this before, unless you said someone who was elderly or mortally wounded to say, I just don't want to. Again, none of his wounds were fatal. He didn't bleed out. He didn't have any kind of a head injury, head trauma that we could see. I mean, and even after the autopsy. So that plays into it. How much do you want something? Your mental drive and your willingness to lose in order to gain, to get better, to grow.
Right.
The big one in today, if everything is easy, if everybody's a winner, there's no losers, doesn't help what we call quality control. It does quantity, but it doesn't produce strong leaders and the people who are self-reliant, because they don't get those opportunities if everybody's treated the same, right?
Yeah.
It pays to be a winner. That's one of our phrases in the teams, and it pays. You get rewards.
Sure.
So when you're there, it's very self-fulfilling when you go, I get it. I know why I work so hard. I get to reap the benefits, and I'm enjoying these things. I didn't think they were attainable. Here I am, and you're able to do them. So it's very easy to be envious of someone and say, look what they have. But again, who determines your fate? It wasn't your parents. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. It wasn't drug addiction, alcohol addiction. You make your own choices, but that's something on our side of the house as far as special forces that I think they do a pretty good job of, is the idea of self-determination, self-reliance. Again, it's not a magic potion. You had to have something within you, and they helped you develop it, and you can become stronger for it. But again, in our side of the house, they really test you to fail. And the status at our job was 0 fail. And one of the things I heard at the JSOC briefing, as far as senators and congressmen coming to the base to say how much we fund you, how much you get projects done, you have a 0 fail mission. You can't say, I couldn't do it because I didn't have enough bullets. I couldn't do it because I didn't have the best weapons. I couldn't do it because I didn't have the best training. I couldn't do it because I didn't have the best budget. For a 0 fail mission, if they ask and you get it granted, this absorbent amount of money that they spend on these individuals and how much equipment you get, then you cannot have an excuse when you can't win the mission. You can't rescue the hostage. You can't get the job done. It's a 0 fail mission. That's why you have the benefit of that training and those things. But again, those people that they pick to be in the programs aren't just everyday people. Super self-reliant, super driven people that have gone through numerous selection processes to build their determination. They failed many times prior to getting there, but they know how to win, and they make good judgment calls. That's the difference. That's something I don't see today too much of, the idea of how do you set people up to win? The right mindset, and then the idea of having the ability to go, I can do this. It's not going to be catastrophic if I fail, but I'm going to learn from it.
Right.
That's not the same as being reckless, doing something stupid that's going to leave you bankrupt,
Right.
broken boned, or...
Right. I would agree. Well, I don't have anything else to cover on this. I think it was a very beneficial conversation, very interesting. As I say, pretty much every time I talk with you, I've learned something new. Like always, and I can say that again today. So, again, I appreciate it. Is there anything, before we sign off here, anything you want to mention or anything else we should cover or discuss before we're done?
I just say there's a lot of people out there that purport to be leadership, go to this seminar and learn how to be confident and this and that. Those are roadmaps, right? But you can purchase all kinds of roadmaps, but if it's not for your locale, it might not work. So listening to other people say, I'm an entrepreneur and you could be a success too, you got to start where you're at. Right? You got to go emulate the people that you wish to be, but you just can't be, well, I want to be like the president. I want to be like this guy.
Right.
That seems to be the easy ticket for a lot of people today to say, well, I see this person on TikTok or YouTube or this, and I got to be like that. And it's like, well, is it the same set of opportunities that you have locally? And can you do that? So I think that's a big realization, knowing where you start from, how to build yourself, and then be prepared to fail and then move up. And as your station in life gets better, what could hold you back? Can it be limiting factors that are extraneous? For sure. But that shouldn't be because you're limited. Right. You determine your success. So I would like to see that more in young people today. The idea of going, they're full of opportunity and potential, and the only limited resource they have is exterior things. To say that's the only thing holding them back. But if you gave them an opportunity, they would max it out and be successful. And then the idea is they pass it on, or they train other people to be similar to them, or they can be your partner. There's nothing wrong with saying, I can count on my partner or the guy who works beside me, and they feel the same way about me. Right? Not one person can always pull the weight of the team. So if you have a strong team like that, like we do in the Special Forces, it's nice to know that every team member can do all these things. But I'd like to see that reflected more in today's society, especially young kids graduating, having determination, knowing what they want to do and where they want to go versus what can they give me, what's somebody going to do for me.
Right. I hope, and hopefully the pendulum will swing back to what you're discussing. And I know, I have kids and I try to raise them and instill that mentality in them so that when the time comes that I'm gone, I'm not here to help them, that they're self-sufficient and they know what to do and they can take care of themselves.
I mention that all the time at the academy where we train. I'm not going to be here when you graduate. You're not going to have my voice in your ear telling you what to do. You need to be confident in what you've been given. Trying to do the same thing with young people talking about going to the military or graduating high school and going to college. If they want to go into VOTEC jobs, to say, can't just point to that and go, that's what I want to be.
Right.
You know how to get there, and you got to get there in steps, but it's going to be on you. It's going to be given to you.
Yep.
And that's huge to say, you know, when the world becomes a little more diverse and things get out of whack, you can cope. You can move.
Absolutely.
Versus, you know, someone's going to come rescue me. Someone's going to bail me out of this. That someone needs to be you.
Wise words. Wise words.
I've failed at a lot of things. If that breeds wisdom, well, then I got a lot of wisdom.
There you go. You and me both, maybe. So, well, hey, again, I appreciate it. Appreciate your time. And again, I said at the beginning, at least I look at you as a hero. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, man.
No problem.
The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.